So the theme of today is Supercharge the customer experience, strategies to enhance every stage of the customer journey. And when I saw the theme, I thought to myself that traditionally when one talks about a customer journey, you usually looking at a sales journey. You're looking at a sales funnel and you're saying these are marketing qualified leads, or these are people that are showing some sort of an interest, and they move their way down the funnel from marketing qualified lead to sales qualified leads. But in the context of what we're talking about today, we actually want to look at the customer experience right across from your first contact with the customer, which probably is in the sales cycle, all the way through to sort of post-sale support and so on. And generally one looks at this in two different sort of divisions: the front office, which is the customer-facing function, and the back office, which is the one that we are more familiar with our ERP systems, where it's admin and support and finance and the non-client facing. But what we wanted to look at today was how these two, the front office and back office, start merging together in a modern world and with modern technology, so that you've got the two together making up your customer journey all the way through from pre-purchase to post-purchase stages. Some examples of front office, which you'd be familiar with, is your sales reps, your marketing team, your help desk, if you run such a thing, your customer success manager, your support team, all of these people interacting directly with the clients. And we'll talk about the technology that can be used to improve that experience. And then the back office examples, which is, as I said, the finance team, the HR department, your warehouse guys that are monitoring stock levels, your IT teams that are making sure that your systems are up and running, your, possibly if you're a big organization or a bigger organization, the data analytics team that are looking at generating reports for you and trying to look at this information that you've collected and to convert that into actionable knowledge. And this is essentially what's happening in the environment today, is that new digital tools are extending that information collection and then helping to interpret that so that you take all of this information and you can then take actions based on it. And I found myself asking, why would you do this? I like to ask the why question. I think there was somebody in management theory that said you need to ask why 7 times to work all your way back to really understand what you're doing. Why are we doing this? And it occurred to me that we're trying to understand what makes a business succeed and how can we make businesses more successful through the clever use of technology. Businesses succeed because they are perceived as better than their competition. And they establish some sort of a competitive advantage, which is a perception in the minds of the consumer. The consumer sees them as better than someone else for a number of reasons that I'll go through in a moment. But at this stage, I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine who's actually long dead and buried. But his name is Arnold. And Arnold, this is the first farming analogy, Grant, apologies, and Donald, apologies. Arnold ran a farmer's supply store very close to where I farmed many, many years ago in South Africa. And he was able to establish a competitive advantage, not because of artificial intelligence, but because of his actual intelligence. He knew his clients intimately. He knew what brand of tractors I owned. When I went in and I asked him for a filter for my Land Cruiser, he knew what filter to provide me with. And he was the master of upsell. He would say, "Oh, you're changing your filter. You need oil. This is the oil you should be using." And he would sell me a 20-liter can of oil at the same time. And he built his business as big as he could using his own brain power. And he knew that if he tried to grow any bigger than that, his service would start degrading and he would lose his competitive advantage. He was not the cheapest by any means, But in terms of what makes up the customer value proposition, he excelled. He excelled in quality, in time. If you needed something and he didn't have it today, he'd have it for you by tomorrow. The functionality, his service, his relationships, his brand. And all of these are the 7 elements that make up a customer's perception. And at the end of the day, it's the perceptions that count. If you have a look at this graph over here, where we've got the perceived price at the bottom on the x-axis, and we've got the perceived value on the y-axis, you can see that if you're right at the bottom end over here, where I've got that little yellow dot, this is the commodities end of the market. You can't differentiate yourself from your competitors. Trigger warning, this is another farming analogy. If you're producing grain, there's very limited opportunity to differentiate the grain that you produce from your neighbor. And the price that you get is the same as your neighbor gets for that grade of grain. So whether it's grain or rice or oil or coal, it's a commodities end of the market. And in order to compete at this end, you can't really shift the perceived value added up on the axis. The perceived value added sits down here at the bottom. And therefore, the only way to make money is to produce it cheaper or scale. So you produce more at a cheaper price. However, if we go back to that slide of perceived customers' value proposition, with most other goods and services that we're involved in other words, as long as we are not at the commodities end of the market, you can influence the perceived value added by giving attention to these aspects, to price, quality, time, functionality, service, relationships, and brand. And the further up you go in the perceived value added, the more likely you are to succeed. So your perceived price versus competitors at the bottom end over there, you simply have your commodities market. At the top end over there, you have your luxury brands like Louis Vuitton and Chanel and Gucci and Bang & Olufsen and Rolls-Royce and Bentley, where the perceived price versus the competitors is very, very high. But the perceived value added sits at the top, and therefore they can still just squeeze in to the market success likely quadrant. But if you don't change the perception of your client, you force yourself back down to this commodities end, or down into the success highly uncertain, or market failure likely into those areas. The other thing to note is that as a business grows, it becomes more complex. And you need to have processes and systems and people to manage the complexity. And the stages of growth in companies are as defined as the stages of growth of a child. So children would have their environment, their developmental milestones. Your child would sit, and then they would crawl, and then they would walk, and then they would be able to bounce a ball, and then they would run, and so on and so on. And this is very similar to what happens to businesses. As businesses grow, they become more complex, and your system has to be able to manage that complexity. Most of you would be familiar with this because you're on a system called MYOB, Acumatica. And by the way, I noticed in our intro, we were still referring to it as MYOB Advanced. I think everybody would be familiar now that it's been rebranded as MYOB Acumatica, and you are now part of an international community of Acumatica users. So as you grow, this is what starts to happen. You get new products and services coming on board. You have increased transaction volumes. You've got more staff. You've got remote operations. You start dealing in multi-currency. All of this has an impact on your financials. So you start having multiple P&Ls, divisional P&Ls. You have multiple ABNs. You start consolidating so that you can present consolidated accounts and understand what's happening across the business. And you start integrating best of breed systems because your one source of truth, your MYOB Acumatica core system, while it can do a lot of things and be a lot of things to a lot of people, You would have specialities in your business where you need best of breed systems, be that a warehouse management system or a data management system. You would need to integrate those back into your core system. And one of the things that creeps into businesses as they grow and they become more complex is this thing called separation of responsibilities, which is a financial term for saying that, sorry, I'll just go back one slide. It's a financial term for saying that whereas Arnold could make all the decisions in his business, he could decide which supplier he purchases from. He could approve the purchase order. He could receipt the goods in. He could determine what price he wanted to sell it for. In a big organization, you need to start creating a separation of responsibilities so that the person who raises the purchase order is not necessarily the person that approves the purchase order, is not necessarily the person that receipts the goods, is not necessarily the person that costs the goods. And you'll find in larger organizations that you start developing a layer in your finance team, which is an internal accountant, a financial controller, a chief financial officer. And the result of growing businesses is that very quickly disconnection starts setting in, and we all long for the past where we could operate as Arnold operated his business and be all things to all people and know exactly what was happening in our business. But as you grow, this disconnection sets in and you start using multiple systems. You start using a lot of Excel, and you start struggling to know, the left hand struggles to know what the right hand is doing. And as a result, you get a degradation of perceived value. So whereas Arnold was able to maintain price and quality and time and functionality and service and relationships and brand, in a bigger business, that becomes very, very difficult to do. And with the degradation of that perceived value, you start getting a loss of your competitive advantage. And that's something to really watch out for in your business, to understand what your competitive advantage is, and to be able to continue to build your business from a strategic and an operational point of view, that you're using digital tools to make sure that you're collecting information and take this flood of information and turn it into actionable knowledge to reinforce your own competitive advantage. Now, you'll hear a little bit later from Swazik about the customer journey, and I've represented the customer journey here in a linear fashion, and she'll show you that it's not actually linear. But if you look at the customer journey all the way through, from sales through to billing, through to your warehouse, through to your shipping, through to your general ledger, etc., you can start using AI, which now, as you know, is starting to make a massive impact in the way we run our businesses. We haven't seen that much of it yet. It's just starting to seep in. But for example, in the beginning over here in your sales and marketing, you could see AI creeping into marketing and lead generation, where you can have very personalized campaigns using AI tools to analyze customer data, segment audiences, and deliver personalized content. The same with predictive analytics. So predicting customer behavior, having a look to see which leads are likely to convert and prioritizing them. So that's in the marketing segment. In sales enhancement, very similar, chatbots for customer engagement, which are becoming more and more sophisticated. And if you go back less than a year, we were all very frustrated with these chatbots. You just couldn't communicate with them. But you see over time how much better they are getting. Sales automation, CRM tools with AI. We'll talk a little bit about that later as well. AI in order fulfillment and processing, automated order tracking. Those of you that have ordered anything off Amazon will notice how that's improved over time, where now not only are your goods going to be delivered tomorrow, but they will be delivered tomorrow between 9:30 and 10:30. And once they're delivered, you will get the text message to say your goods have been delivered. This is all being facilitated by AI and machine learning. Supply chain operation, there's a piece of software in our ecosystem called NetStock. NetStock assists with forecasting your inventory levels based on suppliers' lead times and your purchasing and selling history. That incorporates AI, and those systems, without you doing anything and almost without you being aware of it, those systems start incorporating more and more AI and becoming more and more efficient. AI in customer support and service with AI-powered service desks, and then proactive maintenance and support, including things like the Internet of Things, where your car is feeding information back to the dealership to let the dealership know how many kilometers or how many hours you've used, and the dealership will then proactively speak to you about bringing it in for a service. And then finally, AI for customer retention and loyalty. So the analysis of sentiment, tools like Qualtrics, Net Promoter Score, CSAT, and analyzing your customer retention and your customer sentiment, and then you're dealing proactively with that. And all of these things are designed to enhance the customer journey. So marketing, sales conversion, order fulfillment, customer service, loyalty and retention, so that you can shift that customer perception, so that you can maintain your competitive advantage, and so that you're not in the commodities end of the market where you're simply competing based on the cost of production. So I'm going to hand back to Grant at this stage. Thank you very much for listening to me on that. It's a real pleasure. We really enjoy interacting with our clients. It keeps us in touch with them, keeps us understanding what their needs are and what they want from us. Really encourage you to engage via the questions and so on in the session.